Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Let's Talk Fantasy Football. I'm your host tonight. My name is Nick Walsh, and I am here not with anyone in particular. I'm here for the solo cast tonight. We weren't able to get the old crew together at a time that would agree for everyone. So I'm here basically going through some of the injuries, the trades, because we did see a decent amount of trades this week leading up to the deadline. And then a couple observations in terms of offensive usage, particularly in some backfields that you might be curious about around the league. So we'll get you in and out nice and quick tonight. One, because I'm here by myself, and two, because it's currently Halloween. Happy Halloween, everyone! And I would like to smoke some legal weed. Thank you, state of California, and watch the movie Halloween, which my roommate is currently watching, and I would like to catch the second half of. So with that being said, we'll get you the information that you need, and then keep an eye out for the preview this week, which I think should actually be a three-way preview with Shrek, Vinny, and Don. So lots of information there. I'm sure Don and Vinny will be making fun of each other a lot as well. So you've got that to look forward to. But first, guys, before I get into the actual meat and potatoes, or I guess for Halloween, the Kit Kats and Reese's. Is that a shitty enough Halloween pun for you, or Halloween theme? Anyway, whatever. Guys, we are here courtesy of Auction Draft. So while the NFL season may have officially kicked off and is now halfway over, your hopes of drafting a fantasy team for 2018 are not gone. With Auction Draft, you can draft your team at any time, have a 5-week season with your friends. That way, when you pay way too much for Le'Veon Bell, hoping he shows up, you'll get another shot to get it right for 5 weeks. So you can sign up now, guys, by going to letstalkfantasyfootball.com/auction draft. Use that promo code, all caps LTFF, and save 50% off your league. All right, guys, so we're going to start off with some injuries. There honestly weren't a ton to speak of. There are a lot of nagging injuries, sort of week-to-week injuries that guys have, but not too many like brand new ones going through this week. So Tyreek Hill tweaked a groin muscle, left that game late in the fourth quarter. He practiced in full today, so I wouldn't expect any sort of issues there. Will Fuller, unfortunately, tore his ACL after having really a great game for you. He is going to miss the rest of the season, as someone who tore their ACL would. I guess the big thing in terms of that, and we'll get to the Demaryius Thomas trade. There is production to go around in that Houston wide receiver core. So we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's see here. So this one on the defensive side, Bengals linebacker Carl Lawson, who has been very good this year, he also tore his ACL. He is out. Their defense has already been pretty bad, honestly, which has led to some decently scoring games. This is going to make it worse. So continue to target the Bengals defense as you have been. And then Ronald Jones injured his hamstring. He is expected to miss, quote unquote, a few weeks. Not that you're really playing Ronald Jones, or hopefully you're not, but maybe this gives you a little bit more confidence that the pretty decent weeks that Peyton Barber has been having the past couple weeks might be legitimate, and you might be able to move forward with him, at least with a modicum of confidence. And then we also should mention CJ Beathard has a wrist injury and a thumb injury, or I guess they're probably the same injury, really. He is questionable to go in this Thursday night game that I will be previewing later in this podcast. But yeah, if he doesn't go, you're not going to start Nick Mullins, who is their backup, against this terrible Raiders defense. But it is going to affect the pass catchers in some way that's probably going to be hard to predict, give you a little bit more variance in terms of the outcomes of these pass catchers. So keep in mind, if you're thinking about starting George Kittle or Marquise Goodwin or Kendrick Bourne going forward this week. All right, let's get into these trades. There were a couple big ones. So the biggest one, I think, in terms of fantasy implications, is Golden Tate to the Eagles. So it's unclear exactly how the Eagles are going to use Golden Tate going forward. my guess would be they put him in the slot where you've got, your best receiver who plays on the inside, actually on the inside. I think that's what smart coaches do. And I think Doug Peterson's a smart coach. So I would expect Nelson Aguilar or Jordan Matthews, who have been manning the slot to kick outside, where, those guys are more or less worthless in terms of fantasy value if they're playing on the outside. But Golden Tate should have more fantasy value on the inside. Maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe they kick Tate outside a little bit more. He has played outside in the past, so it's not like it's completely unknown territory. But if I'm the Eagles, I'm trying to maximize Tate's ability. You traded for him because of his skill set, and I'm trying to maximize that skill set by putting him in the slot. So we'll see what happens. In terms of the Lions, the initial thought was that it would be TJ Jones taking over in the slot for Golden Tate. The word out that I have seen recently is that it's more likely to be Brandon Powell. I really don't have a ton of insight on Brandon Powell. These are some targets opening up in the Lions offense. So we'll see if it's just kind of, hey, these targets go to Powell now, or whether it's maybe a little bit more week-to-week consistency for our boys Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones, who have both been pretty inconsistent with Galladay's production really, really taking a dip over recent weeks, and Jones just having a monster week this past week. Next trade we're going to talk about here is Demaryius Thomas to the Texans. When Will Fuller was out for the year with Kiki Cutie, expected to return, but we're not really entirely sure there. It really made it very clear that the Texans needed another wide receiver in order to really compete this year, because they don't have much in terms of the wide receiver position. With Cutie out, Tyler Ervin, who's a running back by trade, has been really manning the slot. They don't really have tight ends who you're afraid of in the pass game. So they needed something. They traded for Demaryius Thomas. Demaryius to me is an interesting guy because he had several very, very good seasons at the beginning of his career. We all know that. I think sort of the production has declined, and my thinking in the reasoning for that is in those first couple of years, they sort of knew how to use Demaryius. If you were to look at something like Matt Harmon's reception perception or that sort of thing, for those sorts of years, what you would see is that Demaryius Thomas was running an abbreviated route tree. So he's not a guy out here like Antonio Brown who they're asking to do everything and then just kind of getting him the ball. They were making Thomas run routes and designing plays for him where they knew he could succeed in what they were asking, and it wasn't out of his comfort zone. So that's a lot to ask for an offense to sort of implement that mid-season. Now, that being said, he's a competent wide receiver. He's certainly better than what they've got on the outside, outside of DeAndre Hopkins, of course. But I wouldn't expect this to be a huge bump in production for Demaryius Thomas himself. The person that I would expect a lot of production to open up for would be Courtland Sutton for the Broncos. He previously was running opposite Demaryius Thomas with Emmanuel Sanders in the slot there. Now he becomes the top outside target on this offense. So I guess the bad part of that, top outside cornerbacks, you certainly don't like that part. But the good part of it is you would think it should lead to an increased target share. And Courtland Sutton has shown himself to be pretty decent this year. So he's a guy, who I was able to nab on a couple waivers. He's kind of like a 50-50 guy in terms of the ownership, where some leagues he was owned, some leagues he wasn't. I was able to nab him in a couple spots. I'm pretty excited about it. I think you should be too if you own him, or if you were able to get him this past week. Ty Montgomery traded to the Ravens, which, traded for a 7th-round pick. My theory, and I don't have anything to back this up, was that they were going to cut him if they couldn't get anything because of the whole situation where he threw a temper tantrum when he was taken out of the game. And then apparently he was explicitly told to kneel the ball on that last kickoff where he fumbled it and did not give Aaron Rodgers a chance to win the game there. So, it kind of makes sense. I think what this does, it definitely complicates the Ravens situation a little bit. I'm interested to see how this plays out because I don't know whether it's going to take away from Alex Collins, who really has kind of been an early down guy. In the beginning of the year, it was sort of split where both Allen and Collins were getting some rushing down work and some passing down work. Over the past couple of weeks, it's sort of shifted where Collins has been the early down guy and Allen has been the passing down guy. So I don't know if Collins' work really changes at all, but you would think it would eat into Buck Allen's work, making him more or less worthless. My hope is that this doesn't turn into a situation where anyone could be getting the touchdowns any week or anyone could be getting 12 carries every week. I'm not going out of my way to start Alex Collins unless I absolutely need to. And I think Ty Montgomery can kind of be dropped at this point. Like you don't need the potential third running back on the Ravens, and it's not like the passing down back work, if he's going to be splitting that at all, is that valuable for the Ravens anyway. In terms of Green Bay, you would think this kind of frees up Aaron Jones, who got a touchdown this past week, has continued to play very well, and you would think would be leading this committee. They've made it clear that they're still going to play Jamal Williams, even though he's been significantly more ineffective than Aaron Jones, but they do like him. He also got a touchdown this past week. So this gives a bump to both of them because now instead of dealing with strictly, I think Vinny and I last week called it the 33.33333% split. You're dealing with more of a 50-50, maybe 60-40 in favor of Jones, but you're dealing with a situation where on a good offense, both of these guys are going to have opportunity to produce, and both of these guys are going to have opportunity to score. So they both immediately get bumped up in terms of their value, and I'm excited to see what the two of them, and particularly Aaron Jones, can do for the rest of the season. The other two trades we're going to mention real quick are on the defensive side of the ball. So Clinton Dix, the Packers safety, he is now on the Washington Redskins. So they're trying to shore up that pass defense a little bit. And then Dante Fowler was traded to the Rams. So Dante Fowler is probably going to be a situational pass rusher on this defensive line. You'll see him in on, obvious passing downs, third down and long, that sort of thing. I don't think he'll be a guy, getting the majority of snaps. He's kind of been a disappointment after, coming into the league, I believe the third overall draft pick, but the Rams have, this incredible rotation of defensive tackles led by Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh and Michael Brockers. What they don't really have is the defensive ends to sort of match and the pressure on the quarterback to sort of match. So this seems to be a move to try and acquire that, and their defense, while it started out very, very good, with some injuries, has been less effective recently. So maybe this makes a difference in the pass game. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break to hear from Auction Draft, and we'll be right back. All right, big thank you to Auction Draft. Make sure you are checking them out with the 5-week season there. What we're going to do now is we're going to go through first some backfields and then just some sort of overall situations where, it might be interesting to look at how the opportunity and the production are breaking down. So I chose these, based on, I guess, level of interest and level of sort of ambiguity. And the next couple of minutes here are going to be a lot of me throwing some stats at you and then, explaining what I really think they mean. So I apologize if it's a lot of numbers. I'll try and, keep that to a minimum as much as possible and more so give you, my take on it or my insight on it. So we'll start with the Raiders, who, we'll be previewing later. So these will be on the test later. No, they won't. So the Raiders now with Marshawn Lynch out are splitting the snaps between Doug Martin and Jalen Richard. So Martin here, 56% of snaps, Richard with 44%. And then Martin on the ground, 13 for 72. 2 targets, 2 catches, 17 yards. Jalen Richard, only 2 carries, 14 yards on the ground, but 8 targets, 8 catches, 50 yards, no touchdowns. Richard was very, very usable in PPR this week. And obviously 8 targets, 8 catches, that's a pretty decent catch rate. But as a running back who's getting sort of these shorter targets, you would expect a higher catch rate, not 100%, but that's, it's not that outlandish to expect Jalen Richard to catch somewhere from 5 to 7 of those 8 targets a week, if that's the case. Now, this was a high scoring game, and this was a game where they were playing from behind in certain spots. So, you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at that production. The other thing is Doug Martin, 13 carries for 72 yards. That's not that bad. Going up against a Niners defense that has been porous and is also potentially going to be missing Reuben Foster and I believe one of their other defensive starters, and I can't remember the name, but I believe it was a safety, and Jaquiski Tartt. There we go. So going up against the Niners defense that has been bad and is also hurt, you kind of like that going forward, and we'll see how this breakdown sort of splits up over the next couple of weeks and determine who we can really use down this playoff stretch. But right now, I'm liking both of those guys for different reasons. Let's move to the 49ers. Matt Breida seems to be on the injury report every single week, but he always plays. I thought Raheem Mostert would be more interesting this week. This week, the breakdown was Breida 47% of snaps, Alfred Morris 17%, Mostert 18%. I really thought Mostert was going to get more. I almost started him in certain leagues in which I was desperate, which thank God I didn't. But what can you do there? Breida got 16 carries for 42 yards. Morris got 6 for 28. Mostert got 2 for 18. No running back had any catches. Only Mostert got targeted, and he had 1. So that's kind of weird in itself. But it's looking right now as if Breida is the guy, and the other guys you can kind of forget about. But Breida's hasn't been a great start either. I mean, the Raiders aren't a good matchup this week. We'll get into that in a little bit. But on a short week with his injuries, he's a bit of a rough one too. Let's move to the Jets, which I'll give the caveat that these numbers should be taken with a grain of salt because it's expected that Elijah McGuire is going to return to the team this year. This week. If you remember last year, he sort of came in and was the third part of that running attack with Forte and Bilal Powell. So he's a guy that the Jets running back coaches like. I believe their coaches compared his skill set to LaDainian Tomlinson earlier in the offseason, which is insane. But not saying he's LaDainian Tomlinson, but saying that the Jets coaches like him. So with that being said, Isaiah Crowell this past week, 46% of snaps. Trenton Cannon actually 54% of snaps. Crowell had 13 carries for 25 yards, 1 target, 1 catch, 13 yards. And then Cannon had 6 carries for 10 yards, 4 targets, 3 catches, 12 yards. So neither of them were particularly efficient with any of this work, or not even close to efficient with this work. I'm interested to see how this works with Eli McGuire coming back. He's a guy that, if you're carrying a running back that you really don't need, or carrying a guy that you really don't need, I don't think he's the worst pickup. This Jets team is bad, which obviously isn't good for him, but none of the Jets running backs have been particularly impressive this year. And if McGuire can come out and impress a little bit, he might be able to really take a hold of this backfield. So I know it's a weird one, but might be able to stash him and get some production out of that. Not backfield related, but I wanted to mention Jermaine Kearse had 10 targets and only 3 catches for 30 yards in this game. I kind of came back to him even after that dud he put up the week before. That sucked. And if you're looking at Chris Herndon at tight end, I know he has touchdowns in consecutive games. Only 2 targets, only in on 50% of snaps. So hopefully the red zone targets keep coming if you're playing him. Let's move to the Seattle backfield where Chris Carson was really dominant here, in a game where they got up early. So there's certainly that. And Detroit's been killed against the run. So Carson here, 67% of snaps. He got 25 carries, 105 yards, and a touchdown. Add to that 2 targets, 2 catches, 19 yards. And then Mike Davis, 32% of snaps, 10 carries for 33 yards, 1 target, 1 catch, 2 yards. Rashad Penny, nowhere to be seen. Chris Carson, I know this was a good matchup for him, and I know his floor is kind of low. Chris Carson, I think, is a guy who's an every week starter. They want to run the ball, and unless they're like a huge dog, that kind of thing, they're going to give this guy 18 touches a game. He got 27 this past week. So Chris Carson, I'm loving the production. I do own him in a couple leagues, so I'm going to keep rolling him out there. Let's move to New Orleans, where we saw sort of a return to what we expected after Mark Ingram came in and really sapped Alvin Kamara's production, I think, a lot more than a lot of us thought he would. So this past week, we saw Kamara get 72% of the snaps. He had 13 carries for 45 yards and 1 touchdown, and then 8 targets, 7 catches, 31 yards, and another touchdown through the air. So maybe the touchdowns, we got lucky on those, but Kamara's a touchdown magnet. We know that. Mark Ingram, in this case, 43% of snaps, 13 carries for 63 yards. So same amount of carries and actually more efficient on the ground than Kamara. Added in 3 targets, 3 catches, 29 yards. So we're liking both of those performances. The touchdowns are going to vary from week to week, but the usage is there for both these guys, and it's going to stay there for both these guys. I'm glad it kind of swung back towards Kamara this week. That's what we were looking for. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You're playing both these guys every single week. Onto Washington, we've got Adrian Peterson, 60% of snaps in this game, 26 carries for 149 yards and a touchdown. That is a lot of production. 1 target, 1 catch, 7 yards. Chris Thompson, 38% of snaps in his first game back, only 3 carries for 13 yards and only 3 targets, 2 catches, 9 yards. So if you started Thompson, if you trusted him, you got burned. There's no other way to put it. This was also a game where they were playing from ahead the whole time. So, Peterson's been a stud. He's been a monster. I'm interested to see how this split works out, as Thompson, one, gets healthier. And then if they're playing from behind a little bit more, whether you can see Thompson get sort of that early season production where he was seeing, 8+ targets in games. So despite, the disappointing game for Thompson, I think better games to come. And Peterson, certainly keep riding it, but be aware that there's, a definite downside in some games to playing him. If they get down 14-0 in the first quarter, it is unlikely that Adrian Peterson, unless he breaks a big play, is going to get you there that week. So just be aware of it. On to Miami. We've got Kenyon Drake, 56% of snaps, and Frank Gore with 44%. So pretty even split there, and very, very even split in the workload. 12 carries, 58 yards, and a touchdown for Drake. 12 carries, 53 yards, no touchdown for Gore. And then in the pass game, 2 targets, 2 catches, 37 yards, 1 touchdown there as well for Drake. And Frank Gore, 2 targets, 1 catch, 5 yards. So I think the point here is basically that, you're definitely starting Kenyon Drake because running back is ass, as we are all aware. But, getting 50% of the snaps and 50% of the work on a pretty mediocre team is not going to lead to every single week success. So we've seen it with Drake. He's a guy where his upside is pretty huge, and we think he's pretty good, and he does tend to get in the end zone. So, another guy you're starting all the time, but be aware of the downside there. And then the last backfield we're going to go through here is Chicago. So this was sort of a Jordan Howard game. That being said, Tariq Cohen still had 58% of the snaps, exact same percentage as Jordan Howard. Both had 58%. So some snaps where they're on there or on the field at the same time. Likely Cohen lined up out wide, that sort of thing. Cohen had 5 carries for 40 yards, 3 targets, 1 catch, 70 yards, and a touchdown. So if you played him, that 70-yard touchdown catch definitely saved you. But, this was a game script where they were ahead and they hammered the ball with Jordan Howard, 22 carries, 81 yards, and a touch. It's hard to predict when teams are going to be ahead. We can look at the Vegas lines. We can look at our intuition. Those things can be wrong, and you can get burned on them. But when you expect Chicago to be playing from ahead, and particularly when you can expect them to be playing from ahead against a team that doesn't really get killed by running backs in the pass game, like they've been playing ahead and used Cohen more, but that's because their coaching staff is pretty smart, and they've been like, oh, these linebackers cannot guard Tariq Cohen. In this game where I guess the coaching staff decided that wasn't entirely the case, though it did work on the one play, they went to hammer the ball with Howard, and it worked. So be aware as a Jordan Howard owner of where you can use him, and be aware of as a Tariq Cohen owner, which, his big playability kind of almost makes him a weekly start no matter what. But be aware that there are some games where he's going to get 6 touches, not every single game he's going to get you 15 touches. So as long as you're comfortable with 6 touches in that big playability, continue to roll him out. All right, guys, so a couple of other situations that I thought were interesting. The first one is the Colts pass catchers. So we'll start with the wide receivers, where the two guys out there were T.Y. Hilton, 82% of snaps, and Dontrell Inman, 74% of snaps. They're clearly 1 and 2 here. Inman's kind of working his way into playable territory. He's doing the same shit he was doing for the Chargers, where, if he gets 10 – it's like Jarvis Landry on the Dolphins type shit. Like his line this past week was 7 targets, 6 catches, 52 yards. So that's what Inman provides for you. Maybe he gets in the end zone. Sweet. Probably doesn't get you 10 to 13 PPR points. Also not that bad. Hilton, very disappointing week. 5 targets, not that bad for him coming back, but only caught one of them for 34 yards. You're not sitting T.Y. Hilton. And if the Colts are forced to pass the ball more these past 2 weeks, they've been able to run the ball a lot. Whereas before that, you had Andrew Luck throwing 60 times a game. So, if they're forced to pass the ball a little bit more going forward, that might help out Hilton a little bit. And, as he gets healthier and back with Luck, we'll see. The tight ends, I think, are the interesting spot. So Jack Doyle came back and was immediately Jack Doyle. 73% of snaps, 7 targets, 6 catches, 70 yards, a touchdown. That's Jack Doyle as hell. And you like that. If you have him on your bench or he got dropped and you picked him up, he's an easy every week starter. I think the confusion here is going to come with Eric Ebron, who, we were able to start pretty much no problem when Doyle was out. Ebron only had 22% of snaps, which was not only significantly less than Doyle, but it was less than 2 other tight ends on the roster, Mo Alley-Cox, who caught a touchdown, and then Ryan Hewitt as well. Ebron got a touchdown. He had 3 targets, 3 catches, 37 yards in that 1 touchdown. But if he's going to be on the field for 22% of snaps, this isn't a train that you should be continuing to ride. You lucked out this past week. Don't push your luck would be my advice there. Doyle's back. Doyle's the guy. Ebron's going to get some touchdowns. When he doesn't, his floor is so insanely low. That being said, floor is low at tight end in general. So, look at your waiver wire. Maybe Ebron is still your best bet just on the hope that he gets a touchdown. But this isn't, the 20-point ceiling Eric Ebron of a couple weeks ago due to the lack of volume. The Packers wide receivers, we had Geronimo Allison and Randall Cobb both returned from injury in the same week. And Vinny and I talked about it. It would be interesting to see how this is used. So Devontae Adams, clear number 1 receiver, 77% of snaps, 7 targets, 5 catches, 133 yards. Great. That's week in, week out. Bank it. You're playing Devontae Adams. You expect a good week. Next, in terms of snap percentage, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I bet that's a surprise to some people, right? So the rookie had 60%, was in on 60% of the snaps. He had 5 targets, caught 2 of them for 45 yards and a touchdown. So usable day. Geronimo Allison, 58% of snaps, only 1 target, 1 catch, 14 yards. And then Randall Cobb, 46% of snaps. He did get 5 targets, caught 4 of them for 40 yards. So it's interesting because MVS, was still used pretty heavily in this game. He had the 2nd most snaps in terms of the wide receivers. I think the question, and I don't have an answer to it, is that going to continue going forward? Was that Mike McCarthy easing Allison and Cobb back into the rotation? Is this truly a 4-receiver rotation, or will MVS's snaps decrease as the season goes on? So at this point, I'm not really comfortable playing any of them. If there is one that I'm going to play, it's probably MVS. But, we could see the snap percentages vary widely as the next couple weeks go on. I'm interested in it, but it's a situation where it's hard to trust really anyone there except for Devontae Adams. Let's move to the New England pass catchers. So just a note, James White with Sony Michel out, 80% of the snaps, 8 carries for 15 yards, got in the end zone on the ground. 13 targets, 10 catches, 79 yards. You can't ask for more than that from a fucking running back. So James White, every week stud until further notice. Wide receiver-wise, Edelman in on 96%, Gordon in on 84%, Hogan in on 59%. So it's clear what the hierarchy is there. Edelman had a great game, 10 targets, 9 catches, 104 yards. You kind of expect that. It's Julian Edelman. He's a guy that Tom Brady trusts. We saw Josh Gordon not really do too much, 6 targets, 4 catches, 42 yards. He was matched up with Tre'Davious White of the Bills for a lot of this game. So, as the matchups become a little bit better, as his chemistry with Brady increases, one of these Josh Gordon breakout games is coming. It's just a matter of when. And I think, playing based on matchup, but you should be playing him unless you really have a good matchup otherwise. Chris Hogan, can safely stay unrostered at this point. And then it's worth noting that Gronk was very, very disappointing this week, but he was in on 89% of snaps, had 8 targets, only caught 3 of them for 43 yards. The floor hasn't been there for Gronk this year, but he's Gronk. He could put up 20 points at any time. Tight end sucks. You got to roll him out there. Speaking of tight end sucking, David Njoku, just when we thought we could rely on him, puts up a solid 0 targets. So who knows where the floor is there? I'm confused by the Browns. Just wanted to mention it. And then the last one before we get into the Thursday night game here, Arizona. Arizona, first game with Byron Leftwich at OC. Mike McCoy is obviously out. So let's check in on our fantasy relevant guys. David Johnson here, 16 carries for 59 yards, 5 targets, 5 catches, 41 yards. Incredibly, I can't think of a goddamn word, so I'm just going to go with good. Incredibly good that they were using him in the pass game more. They lined him up out wide a couple times. They lined him up in the slot. They did these things that make David Johnson a great player. They make him able to get out in space with the ball. He didn't get in the end zone, but he put up a decent week for you. That was something where before David Johnson was basically a touchdown dependent guy. So he also might have had more. He wasn't out there for that whole last drive. He was being checked for a concussion. They did put him in for the end of it, so he was just fine. But yeah, really, 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 wow, the word is on the tip of my tongue, and it's the same word that I was looking for before. Encouraging. How was it that hard to think of the word encouraging? I'm a fucking idiot. Really encouraging game and usage to see from David Johnson. I'm excited to see what he does going forward. Larry Fitzgerald, 12 targets, 8 catches, 102 yards, and a touchdown. This is his 3rd straight game with 8 or more targets, and any receiver averaging 8 or more targets, even if they're from Josh Rosen, should be getting played. I think he should be starting Larry Fitzgerald. Obviously look at the matchup a little bit, but if this is Larry Fitz for the rest of the year, which I am constantly wrong on Larry Fitzgerald, then he's a great fantasy asset. And then Christian Kirk, 7 targets, 3 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown. He's sort of like a roll the dice flex wide receiver 3 type guy. I think he stays in that range. You just got to either hope he breaks a big play, gets a touchdown, or both. All right, guys, let's get to the Thursday night game. We got Oakland at San Francisco, the Battle of the Bay. San Francisco's a 3-point favorite. The over-under is 46. That seems low to me. I know both of these offenses kind of suck, but so do the defenses. And particularly if Beathard goes, which we'll get into, I think this could be like a sneaky shootout, like a back and forth type of game. The Raiders have sort of been involved in a couple of those this year. So let's talk about the ones you should definitely be playing. Or first, let's talk about CJ Beathard, I guess. He's got that wrist and thumb injury. If he doesn't go, Nick Mullins is going to start. We don't really like that. So I think regardless of that, you should be playing George Kittle. He's the top target in this offense. Marquise Goodwin is only really getting 4 to 5 targets a game. If you play him, you're really hoping for that long ball, that long touchdown. You might get it, you might not. It's really hard to predict. The Raiders defense is as bad as it gets, so it's as good of a matchup as you can possibly get. But who knows if he, gets behind and if whoever's at quarterback connects on with him. The other pass game target that you might want to consider if Pierre Garçon stays out is Kendrick Bourne. This guy got 10 targets last game, and the Raiders defense is bad. So it's clear they're looking to him. It's clear they're using him, and he's probably on your waiver wire, or maybe he just got picked up. I don't know. But he's a guy that you honestly should be able to use, like pretty much no problem. So Yeah, I'm on the Kendrick Bourne train if Pierre Garcon's out again. Um, we talked about Matt Breida and his injury issues, his usage issues. If he goes, the Raiders defense is bad. You're probably still starting him. He's not a great start, but you're probably still starting him. Hope he falls into the end zone. On the Raiders side of the ball, the definite starts for me are Jalen Richard, who we mentioned his usage before in the pass game, and Jared Cook, because tight end sucks. Amari Cooper's gone. They're not using one receiver particularly more than the other, or than the others, rather. I think Jordy Nelson, Brandon LaFell, and Seth Roberts each had 4 targets this past game. That sucks. But Jared Cook, at the tight end position, as weak as it is, he's a guy that you need to be starting. And I think Doug Martin is kind of a decent start this week. I alluded to it earlier. He's not going to get too much work in the pass game, but he looked pretty decent in that first game against the Colts, which the Colts defense hasn't been as bad as it was in past years. The Niners, particularly if Reuben Foster doesn't go, is going to be a very good matchup for him. So, yeah, I think he can roll Doug Martin in, what is kind of a shitty bye week. Derek Carr, I think, is a guy you might want to consider starting. Both of these defenses are bad. I think it might be a sneaky shootout, particularly if Beathard plays. I don't think that's a terrible play. I'd put him in the same level as, like a Baker Mayfield stream maybe, or like a Joe Flacco stream, like these guys who you don't really like, but you might have to because there are a lot of quarterbacks on buys. I think that kind of does it, though, for the Raiders for me. I'm not really looking at any of their wide receivers in particular. I might do a little bit more research to try and figure out which one I might want to fire up cheap in DFS. But at this point in the week, actually, no, it's the Thursday night game. I don't play the Thursday night DFS slates. That was a stupid thing to say. At this point in the week, I'm not trusting any of them. I don't think you need to either. And guys, I think that's going to do it. That'll do it for me. That'll do it for the Week 8 recap. Keep an eye out for the previews coming out. I think it should be Vinny, Don, and Shrek. So a lot of information, a lot of opinions there. Make sure you are listening to that to get exactly what you need to roll on into the weekend. So for Let's Talk Fantasy Football, I'm Walsh. Later, podcast.